And then also third, if you are listening in on your computer speaker by default, and we prefer to join in by phone, you can hover over to the menu on the bottom where it says mute unmute. In the lower left corner, if you click on the arrow upper, there's a little arrow that goes up. Switch to phone audio, you can use that as well. And then finally, I know that this is new for many of us, so there might be some technical issues, or if you happen to see my kids running to me, I do ask that you bear with us and keep in mind that, you know, it is kind of the new norm for us. But we will try to make it work for you and share some important information for you to use. So we just ask for your grace in terms of being understanding as we go through the webinar. And I will be in the background helping out in the chat room, and any technical issues, please feel free to message me directly. Unfortunately, the chat box is it's not open to everyone, just to kind of, again, keeping that time in mind. So just message me directly if you have any questions or issues. So Erin, pass it back to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today at InnovateEDU. We're incredibly grateful for the response that we've gotten in regard to the Google Classroom connector. I'm really pleased to share this time with you this afternoon. And so when I express my gratitude that you're joining us and that we're able to walk through the tool. So on today's call, you're going to be hearing from me. I'm Erin Moat. I'm the Executive Director of InnovateEDU. You're also going to be hearing from another ninja in the data science and tech world, my colleague and dear friend, Dan Hess, who's the Director of Data and Evaluation for KIPP Bay Area Public Schools. I just want to express our gratitude to Dan, who helped lead development of this work as part of our team, and the dedication and partnership of many folks who were engaged in the development of this work. From all different types of organizations and companies, and the commitment that we have to ensuring that tools are open source. And as she shared, is going to be posting in the chat a link for you to submit questions in the Google form. We're probably not going to get to all of your questions today. We will attempt to get to some of those questions today, but in order to make sure that you are successful in doing the work, after seeing how the tool is set up today, you can also go through online training on our website, www.landingzone.org/Google Connector. You are able to hopefully set it up. You might have questions, and so we'll be doing a Q&A webinar next week where we will be going through a curated set of questions, but also be helping troubleshoot. And as always, our team is here, and we'll be posting some links that you'll see at the end of the presentation if you want to reach out. Dan and I have also shared our email addresses, so we're super open to feedback. This is V1 of the connector. I think both Dan and I felt a ton of urgency in getting this out to you and to schools across the country, districts, and even states. We know many of you had to pivot very quickly to tools and are needing data infrastructure and data visualization right now, particularly out of Google Classroom. We wanted to meet that need, skate to the puck, if you will, but we're also trying to skate ahead of the puck. And so you'll see some new updates to this work, continuing updates to this work, and visualizations evolving as our team continues to build. So in the spirit of InnovateEDU, which is a national nonprofit located in Brooklyn, New York, we are a disruptive force in K-12 education that really thinks about bringing together uncommon alliances of students, teachers, designers, and technologists to really think about how do we meet the needs of the field. A lot of the work we do is around short cycle innovation, but it's also around building products and tools that have equity at the center of their focus. So we try to keep our products and tools very low cost for schools and districts so that they can have best-in-class enterprise architecture, if that's Landing Zone, a best-in-class SIS and LMS, if that's Cortex, or as they're working through their data modernization plans, free tools through Project Unicorn. This tool is an open source tool. So not only are we hoping that it proliferates widely throughout the K-12 education world, it also gives you the opportunity to fork the code, which we can talk about a little bit later. If you're a more sophisticated user, a more sophisticated programmer, there are opportunities for you to also contribute those branches back to the code in GitHub. And I know Dan's going to talk about that a little bit later, so I won't steal his thunder. But really the strength of this work is the community of technology ninjas that we've created to really help meet the needs of schools, districts, and teachers around the country. So our next slide is really going to tell you a little bit about what we thought about when we started this work. So when we came up with this idea alongside our partners in the DataWiz community of practice, a national community of practice that's at the intersection of data, data science, and education that InnovateEDU leads, we really thought about schools and districts across the country, the rapid pivot that they were making, potentially the lack of infrastructure that they had, and the fact that many of us, as Anne shared, are working anywhere from basements to closets to I am lucky enough to have a home office, but not all of us. Some of us are working at the dining room table, and maybe you're like me and you have kids running around as well. And so how do we make something simple, quick, fast, and that really gets you what you need? So the solution is a low-code solution. It's capable of bringing all of your school's classroom, Google Classroom data into one place. We deliberately designed it that way so that it can really help you build a place or a repository for that data to come into. It also allows you to take existing tools that you might have for data visualization and hook them up with the connector itself, and you'll see that. It's actionable, so we hope that it allows you to see the data that's important to you, and we're going to continue to add more code to this connector that really allows you to look at class assignments, how many of your students are completing those assignments, and hopefully help you reach out to those students who are not engaged right now in Google Classroom. And also the number of the assignments created by the teacher. We know that many schools and administrators will use this tool in order to make sure that content is being delivered, that students are engaged, even maybe for attendance. And so we're hopeful that as you are thinking about the work that you're doing, or as there's places in the tool that need to be built out, you're super welcome to share those ideas with us. We also want it to be visual. So we know that data for data's sake is not great unless you can action it. So it's really important to create the tools that we've created in Google Data Studio and some free dashboarding if you use Google Data Studio, or maybe you don't have a data visualization tool. Use Google Data Studio. It's a free tool in your Google environment. There's some pre-built reports that allow you to visualize the data in the connector from the beginning. But you can also use other popular BI tools, including Tableau, Power BI, and Looker. We really think this is a full stack solution for you to be able to not only get your data out, but to be able to visualize it. And then finally, it's free and it's open source. And that's really important to us. We'll talk about contributing back in a little bit, but there is no cost to do this. There is no developer who's going to be going into your Google environment. This happens completely securely in your own Google environment with your own permissions and with the structures that you've set up. So how does this work? You're using Google Classroom right now. You're going to extract your Google Classroom data and you're going to load it into a tool called Google BigQuery. Using BigQuery, which is a fully managed cloud data warehouse, you'll then be able to analyze your classroom data using SQL. This allows you to create data dashboards or reports using popular business intelligence tools. If you need pre-built dashboards, we've done that for you in Google Data Studio. So you would be completely within your entire Google environment. If you have these other existing tools, you're welcome to hook this data into visualization and BI tools that you're already using and folks are familiar with. I'm gonna now, I think, switch over to my colleague, Dan Hess. And if you could just, great.
Awesome. Do you want me to go? Let's see if I can share my screen here. We can go from there.
Dan is actually going to do a demo right now of the tool. And what this will do is it'll allow y'all to see the setup of the tool and to see how it works. And so we're super excited to be able to do this. That's a lovely picture, Dan.
Thank you. Let me try again here. There we go. There, you'll see that.
Great, perfect. So Dan is going to take us through now a live demo of the tool and take us through the steps to set up. I promise Dan will try to do his best to speak slowly, since we know that many of you will be using this as a how-to guide as you're moving through setting up the tool yourself. Again, we're also recording this. We'll be placing it on YouTube, on our website. There'll be the Q&A. So there's lots of opportunities for you to, you know, pause and keep going. I know I use a ton of how-to videos on YouTube in order to put together my IKEA furniture. And oftentimes I need to go back 2 or 3 times. And so we'll make sure that you have the ability to see that, as well as what the steps are. Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'm so excited to be here and be able to share this tool with all of you. It's been a little bit of a labor of love, but you know, we know how vital it is to have access to this data to provide insights to our schools during these school closures, and it's been really vital for my organization, and I'm just so grateful to everyone who's contributed to this code. And as Erin said, it is an open source repo, so you know, many organizations are responsible for building this tool, as well as like volunteers who have been coding and supporting the development of this tool. So just so excited to release this, and looking forward to like hearing from all of you and helping us grow this. So what we're looking at right now is an excellent tutorial that the Innovate team has built to help guide you through this. I'm going to be referencing this throughout the demo, so that you know that like even if I'm not here or you're not listening to me on YouTube, there is a resource you can use to like step you through this. But I really just want to show you, because I think it is really valuable to see a live demo of how this works. That being said, it is a live demo, so bear with me if there are any like technical issues or glitches. It's sort of a, you know, always sort of happens when you're doing live demos that things go wrong. So I'm going to do my best to troubleshoot live if that happens, but hopefully we're going to go off without a hitch. So this is available. There's a GitHub repo from InnovateEDU that houses this, and there's a link to it in the bottom of this tutorial, but this tutorial is also linked in that GitHub repo. So you can go see how the code works all under the hood, but you also don't need to. You can certainly walk through this. It is a command line tool that you can run from within Google Cloud Shell. And that allows you to just like hop in, run the code, watch it run, jump over, see the data in BigQuery, and then connect your reports directly. Innovate, again, has like built out a series of reports in Google Data Studio that plug right into this. So it's an end-to-end solution. It's getting your data out. It's organizing the data that you have available in this free and available data warehouse, and then also the reporting and visualization on the other end of it. So it is an end-to-end solution. But if you have your own infrastructure that you want to operate in, or a more sophisticated stack that you need to use, I know we're a Tableau house, we use Tableau, and so this also works with all of that seamlessly. So without further ado, let me jump in. Some of the prerequisites you're going to need. One of the first things that you're going to need to do is create a Google Cloud project to run this within. It is as simple as just a push button. You can see there's a link here directly to it. You can click into it and then just give it a name. It's as simple as that. Beyond that, you will need to have some support from whoever is your Google admin. That might be yourself, depending on the size of your organization, or it might be someone on your IT team, but you will need to provision the accounts that are going to be given access to run this code. You, in your personal account that's running this, don't have to have that level of control, but someone in your organization will need to authorize it. There is sensitive student data in here, so that is like something that has to be like provisioned within your org. Google Cloud Platform looks like this. I've already got a project set up here, but again, it is as simple as just create project and put in a name. And you can see I've got a name for this project right here. Once you've created your project, we're going to go out and we're going to fetch the code. It might sound a little intimidating. We're going to type some commands into the terminal. Again, most of these are cut and paste commands. You can just go into the tutorial, highlight it, copy and paste it into the terminal, and just let it run. You don't really need to think a little bit too hard about what's happening under the hood, but if you are savvy and you understand what's going on, that also works just fine. So all of this runs in a serverless shell terminal that you can access right here at the top corner of Google Cloud Platform. So I'm going to click on Activate Cloud Shell, and it's going to provision this in real time. And it does persist between sessions, so anything you're doing, you're not going to have to redo every single time you need to run it. You can see it's spinning right here, provisioning your Google Cloud Shell machine. Most of this I've also already pre-done, so I'm going to like speed through some of the steps so that we don't have to like watch it spin, but do know that it will take a little bit longer for you when you're running it the first time through. So you can see here, I've got my account in Cloud Shell, and it's already aware of what project I'm in. Within the command, you can also like make sure that it's referencing that project correctly by cutting and pasting in this gcloud config set project and then put in the project ID. And again, the project ID is just that name of your project that you've created. So for mine, it's this one right here. And we're going to clone the repo. You don't have to worry about installing Git because Google Cloud Shell comes already with all the requisites that you need. It's got the Git that is going to get our code down. It's got Docker to run this in an isolated environment, and it has the Python code or Python environment that you'll need to run this. Again, it's all written in Python open source. So I would cut and paste this git clone command, and that would create a repo in here. I actually already have this repo in here, so we can see, I'm going to cd into it. Classroom, and now I'm in it. I'm going to open the editor just so we can see. Again, you don't have to entirely operate in the shell here. You can actually open up the editor and see those files. Again, it's going to take a second to initialize. And while that does that, I'm going to talk a little bit about like the additional files that you'll need. So there are some sensitive configuration environment variables that you need to set up as part of this for it to work. And that is not pushed into the repo. So there is a little bit of a setup here that has to happen, but it's very straightforward. And there's an example of how to do it directly in the environment itself. So once I've got all of that installed, you'll see a folder that looks like this. It'll be called Google Classroom. Within it, you'll see a folder called Data and Docs. Most of these are for if you want to do troubleshooting. You can actually pull some of the data out. You can pull out your logs, you can inspect them. And the docs is really what we use to publish the tutorial online. The things that you're going to need to add in here, you're going to need a .m file, which is a hidden file. It's a system file, and you won't see it here by default. So in order to like review the hidden files, we're going to go up here to View. And then we're going to go down to the bottom here where it says Toggle Hidden Files, and that will show us those additional files. And so you'll see that the repo does come with a file here called .m-sample, and .n.sample has a skeleton of all the different things that you can configure in the environment. Now, you don't need to configure all of these. It does have some flexibility that allows you to change how you're going to run this depending on your organization's needs, but some of them will be required across the board. So one of those is an account email that has an admin access within your organization. Again, you don't have to have the password or the login for this account. It's going to be provisioned within the Google Admin Console, but you do need to know that email address that it can run as. Similarly, for a portion of this code is reaching out to a different endpoint, not the Google Classroom, but going into Google Admin to pull some of its aggregated reports to inspect Google Classroom logins. And in order to do that, you're going to want to filter by only looking at your students. And that requires knowing the name of the organizational unit that students are contained in your environment. If you have multiple org units, one thing I would recommend is like putting those all under one root. The code does not currently support like looping over a bunch of different org units. If you're in a scenario like that, or if your student organizations are on a different domain that's just whitelisted, they're not aliased within the single domain, this probably is not going to work as it's currently configured. That's okay. You can just turn this part off. We've actually moved away from using it because we're really focused on Google Activity rather than Google Login. We're trying to go to that next step and like think about engagement. But that is something to consider. And we'll talk a little bit more about troubleshooting at the end and things that are common things to deal with, but that is one of them. The next environment variable is the school year start. And this is just a ISO formatted date. I know that sounds scary, but it's year-month-day. And that is going to tell it like how far back should we go to pull data? And depending on when you've started distance learning, that may just be March. But if you've been using Google Classroom all year long and you want to be able to sort of see how things were happening before, school closures and after, and you want to have that benchmark, you can reach further back. The further back you go, though, the more data it's going to pull, and it will slow the job down. So do be thoughtful about how much data you need for the insights you're trying to gather. Lastly, some of these are already configured, but the DB dialect is BigQuery. And that's because we have some support within this to also support SQLite for testing. And in a fork of this branch, we have one that supports Microsoft SQL and Postgres as well. The name of your DB, and this again is just that project ID that you typed in. And then DB schema, this is the data set within BigQuery. So part of the prerequisites of this is that you do need to go into BigQuery and create a data set. So I can show us really quickly how we do that. I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna go to BigQuery. I've got these pins. You may have to like search through the products to find it, but I recommend pinning the ones that you're gonna be looking at frequently. And BigQuery is one that you'll be going back to because you're gonna wanna use your SQL to inspect it. You may have custom SQL you wanna build your reports off of. So having that pinned and easy to get to is gonna be helpful. I'm going to just shrink this console so we can see what's going on in the background here. So you can see within BigQuery, there's my project ID. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to click on that and I'm going to want to create data set. You can see I've already got one here. We're going to call it staging. The default reports from InnovateEDU in Data Studio, the custom SQL that they use to create the custom data source that feeds those reports, I'll reference this staging data set. But if you want to call yourself something else, you can. Whatever makes sense within your organizational context is fine. Or if you're already using BigQuery and you have an existing data set, you can certainly put the data in there. It's all of the tables are prefixed with Google Classroom, so you'll be able to tell them apart from any existing tables you have. It's just ease of use so that it's plug and play, so you can just use the same data set. But otherwise, all you have to do is change that name in the custom SQL and it'll all work fine. Once that's done, everything else is just going to happen on the code side. This is really the only setup that you need to do within BigQuery or Google Cloud. We're going to jump over now to look at the provisioning and permissions that you're going to need to do that. So now that we have that schema, we're going to need to get a service account credentials. So I'm going to jump back to our tutorial here. We're in step 4 at this point, creating our environment file, and we've filled those in. What I would recommend is that you just make a copy of this .m-sample and fill things in and just call it .env. You can also just rename the file, but it's nice to have a reference. If you delete things, you always have that one that you can go back to and say, oh, that's the thing I deleted. So making a copy and then putting your own variables in there will be fine. All right, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to enable the APIs that are needed within Google Cloud Shell to access the data. So those two are mainly the Google Classroom API and the Google Admin API. The simplest way to do this is just cut and paste these commands directly into the Google Cloud Shell and press run. You can also, if you prefer, you can go over to the API library within the developer console and search for them and enable them. But honestly, the easiest way is to just cut and paste these commands. So I can do that now. Cut and paste, come back over here, switch over to my terminal, paste that in, and press enter. You'll see it takes a second for it to authorize, but now that one's authorized. I'll do one more for admin. Now the APIs have been authorized for this account and this shell environment to access. The next thing I need to do is create that service account. Now this is one where you may need some support from whoever maintains your Google admin at the domain level. You will need to be able to get in and create the service account. You can do, again, you can do this from the Google Cloud Platform, and I have a link pinned here for this IAM and admin, and the one we're looking for is service accounts. So we jump over to service accounts. We're going to create service account. I've already got one here that we're going to use, but I'll just show you what this interface looks like to create one. I'm going to click on create. You give it a name. I really recommend giving it a name specific to what you're doing. It's possible that within your organization, you're doing other things with Google and you're going to want to know which ones are doing what, particularly if you have an administrator who's like, wait, what are you asking for permission to? What account is doing this? So we tend to name ours after the project. So Google Classroom API, Google API Client, something along those lines that makes sense and will be understandable for others. So I'm going to, for my purpose right now, I'm going to call this test client. Click create. And then the role that it's going to need access to is here under BigQuery. It's going to want admin access because you're going to be doing a lot of things within BigQuery. It's going to be reading from tables. It's going to be writing to tables. It's going to be dropping tables. So it's going to need broad access within BigQuery. It's possible to give it more fine-grained controls if you're very familiar with the Google Cloud Platform, but this is going to be the easiest way to set that up. Then we'll click continue. I'm going to reference that, that service account email here. And for us, we have a general account that we call our data admin that we put in here. And then finally, we'll create a key. This is that .json file that has all of the service credentials that are needed in order for the code to run. So we're going to create that key. Again, pick JSON and click create, and it will download that locally onto your computer. You're going to need to upload this into the Google Cloud Shell and rename it and move it into the Google Classroom folder in order for it to be referenced by the code. So again, I've gone ahead and done this up front, but I'll just show you where that is within the code base. So here I can jump back over to the Google Cloud Shell terminal. I can click on these three dots and I can say upload file. This can also be done from the same editor environment if you want to see where it's going and just drag and drop. So I'm going to do that because I think it's the easiest way to do this. I'm going to, again, switch back over to the editor. I'm going to go more, upload file. It'll give me a little prompt here. I'm going to go find it in my downloads. There it is. Say open. You'll see it transferred it. And notice that it doesn't put this into the Google Classroom folder. It's going to go into the root directory that Cloud Shell operates in, and there it is right there. So what I would do is like right click on it, rename it to service.json, and then just move it into this Google Classroom folder. And again, I've already got that here. Service.json. So that's what it's going to need in order to run. Once you've got this account created, you're going to need to give it access to the right scopes. And the scopes mean like all the different data points that it needs to pull from Google Classroom and from Google Admin in order to pull the data that you want. That needs to be done within the security controls within Google Admin on your domain. And you may need to partner with someone on IT if you're not a domain administrator. Again, our tutorial here is going to give you directions on how to do that. So under API controls, it'll, again, directly link you back to that service account. But what you will need, and I'm going to cancel out of this and open up a new one. I'm going to click into it, and you'll see there's this unique ID. No worries, I'm going to delete this one so I'm not exposing anything to the internet. But I would copy and paste this, and then jump over to my admin console, and I'm going to go over to security. Again, there's a direct link in the tutorial here to get to those domain. But I'm just going to walk you through where this exists. You go to security. And again, if you don't have access to it, you can also just point your IT team at this tutorial and have them walk through these steps. Go down to the very bottom, you're going to see API permissions, and click on that. And then to manage the scope, we need to go down to the bottom to manage domain-wide delegation. Click on that. And then we're going to add a new client. We're going to put in that unique identifier here. And then all we need to do is just cut and paste this comma-separated list of scopes. So these are going to give things like access to the org unit within the directory, the admin reports, and all of the different endpoints within Classroom that we're going to want. Things like announcements, courses, coursework, Guardian links, profile and emails, rosters, student submissions, and topics. All of these are very helpful and that enable you to look at different pieces of the data. Are students doing their assignments? Are they logging into the platform? Student emails is really useful if you have a student information data set that you want to cross-reference this against. Courses, so you can filter by what course you're looking at, coursework, what are the individual assignments and the details about those assignments. There's also other pieces of this data that can be helpful. Guardian emails, for instance, is really handy if you're doing inviting parents to get those weekly summaries in Google Classroom and you want to know which parents have been invited and which ones have accepted. That's also available in this data set. So cut and paste that into this admin scopes and then click authorize, and that will provide it the access it needs. At that point, you're good to go to run this code. So now we're going to build and run. Now this code does use a tool called Docker, which if you're unfamiliar with, that's okay. It's built in directly into Google Cloud Shell, and this may be your first time running it, but the basic concept with Docker is that it builds a very lightweight virtual machine that isolates all of your code and keeps it safe, brings all of the dependencies it needs, make sure that exactly what we're running in our environment is exactly what you're able to run in your environment. There's none of this like, oh, you have to configure it a little bit differently for your environment versus this one. It's running on Windows, it's running on Linux, it's running on Mac. Docker helps separate all of that. But it does have this two-step. You want to build it, and then you want to run it. And if you make changes to your code, like your environment file, and then you need to run it again, you're going to need to rebuild that environment. It's as simple as just cutting and pasting this direction. So I'm going to do CD into that Google Classroom, and then I'm going to copy this Docker build. I'm going to do this in the terminal. So I'm going to open my terminal. I'm going to paste that in. What this command is doing is it's telling Docker to build an image of our code. And that -t is saying this is a tag. What do I want to call it? And I'm just going to call it Google Classroom. That dot at the end is very important. You do need to include that dot. So make sure that you add that at the very end. That's telling it, look for the Docker file in this folder and build it based on the commands there. So I'm going to press enter, and it's going to run. Now, the first time you run through this, it's going to have to pull out some of the dependencies. So it's going to reach out and it's going to pull down the Python image so you can see it's right now it's running through and it's bringing down the base image of this, which is a standard Python Docker. And then we've built some additional commands and dependencies on top of that. This is another advantage of Docker. It has these like nested layers of dependencies so that if somebody else has open sourced their version of this code, you can sort of build upon it. And that's what we're doing here. The Python 3 library or Docker image is the base of ours. So it already has everything we need for our code. And you'll see this happens pretty quickly. It's just going to reach out and it's going to step through each of the commands that we have in our own Docker. To do this, again, there's nothing you have to do here. Just sit back, watch the terminal go, and feel like a hacker. It'll tell you how far along you are. So we're on step 8 out of 12. It's going to keep going until it finishes through installing all of the dependencies that this thing needs, both at the operating system level and the Python code level. The step it's on right now, this is the Pip End install. We use a library called Pip End to manage all the Python dependencies. This is what's going to reference your .m file. It's going to isolate the Python dependencies themselves even within Docker, and it's going to manage our virtual environment. For anyone who's familiar with Python, it's a nice mix of virtual env, python.env, and pip. This is usually the step that takes the longest. This has to bring in all of the Python libraries that it's being used on. The main ones that they're using are some of the most common data science libraries like pandas and the Google BigQuery client that it needs. All right. While that finishes up, I'm going to direct us to the next step. When we're ready to run, you can see a couple of example commands here that we're going to use to run this code. The first of which is sort of I'd say like a smoke test. Let's just make sure it works. And this is the area where if there are any bugs that are going to happen, they're probably going to happen here. You're going to pass it in this run command, docker run --rm -it Google Classroom --courses. And what this is telling it is saying, Docker, I want you to run in an interactive terminal this image I've called Google Classroom. And the -rm just makes sure that it doesn't sit around doing nothing and taking up space. So it's going to remove it after it's done. -- courses is part of a series of flags that we can pass it in interactively to tell it what points of data do I want to bring. I don't have to run the entire job every time I run it. It may be cases where like students are not changing very frequently at this point in the year, and so you don't want to run the student's endpoint every single time, so you can tell it what to run when. It's also be helpful if you're like spacing it out through the day and you want to run different pieces. But courses are going to be necessary for most of the code, and so it's a good place to start and make sure it all runs. We're still going and loading. Some other endpoints that exist in here. Again, there's an all option. The all option will allow you to run the entire code base end to end without having to like stack all of these different commands together. You can get the usage data, courses, topics, coursework, students, teachers, guardians, submissions, which is the like actual student turning in of assignments, invites that have been sent out, which are for guardian invites, aliases. One of the nice features of Google Classroom is that it provides this idea of a course alias that you can use to put in like a PowerSchool classroom ID, for instance, if you're on PowerSchool for your SIS, or if you're using something like Illuminate, whatever that unique identifier is for those courses within your student information system, you can actually use the aliases to connect them. Invitations will actually track student invitations to classes to see if you've sent out an invite for a student to join your class and whether or not they've actually accepted it. And then finally, announcements. This is another thing that Google Classroom enables teachers to shoot out announcements, and you want to see what those are or like how often they're going out. You can have that data as well. All right, we've finished going through all the steps, and at this point, we're ready to run. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to copy that first command. Everybody cross your fingers and hope this works. And you see it's going to print out its logging interactively to the terminal. So it's telling me it's hitting the courses endpoint right now, and it's on the first request on page 1. If there are very large course sets, it will loop through them in pages. It does use some built-in batching to help speed up some of this, but the job does pull in a lot of data, and it can take some time for this thing to run end to end. So one of the things to understand is that if you're running the --all flag and you've either like a very large date range or a lot of classrooms. So like for us, we have about 7,000 students and about 1,300 courses in Google Classroom right now. This thing takes about 20 to 30 minutes end to end to run. That's after a lot of fiddling with performance. When we first started our development, it was taking like 5 hours. And so we have significantly increased the performance of the tool. But if you have a very large organization that you're working with this, it may be something you want to tinker with either the batch sizes or with the date ranges to have it execute in a reasonable time for you. Also open to polls if people want to like mess with the code and try to get it to run faster. We'd love to hear from you. There we go. It took 1 minute for me to run those courses, which wasn't too bad for this one endpoint. But again, this is not the entirety of the code. Student submissions is where it tends to take a large amount of time. So our smoke test worked. We were able to connect and run it. At this point, I could run all. I don't want to let you sit here for 20 minutes while it runs, but that would be the next step. I just change this to -all and then run it, and I'd be good to go. If you know that there's a specific configuration you're going to want to run every single time you run this code, like I don't actually want all those guardian invites or announcements. I just want students, teachers, courses, and submissions. You can configure that within the .env. There are these pull_endpoint variables that you can set to yes, and then you don't even have to pass it a flag. You can say just Google Classroom, and it'll run those by default every single time. I see Erin nodding along, so I think she was about to chime in with that. All right, at this point, I have data in BigQuery, so I can jump back over to my BigQuery environment. I'm gonna just close this terminal because it's finished running. Go over to BigQuery, and I'll show you where these tables exist. There we go. In that data set under staging, you'll see I have a series of tables here. I'm just gonna see if I can shrink this. No, okay. So you'll see all of them are prefixed with this Google Classroom prefix, so Google Classroom _announcements, _courses, etc. So again, if you already are using BigQuery for some of your data, you'll be able to spot which of these tables very easily. You also don't need to have a data set that calls it Google Classroom because they're already prefixed this way. And then each one of these you can write SQL against, run, All of the identifiers you need to join the data between them exist. We've been very careful about the schemas that we've created for these and what essential data is necessary there so that you can do all of this within your reports. Again, you don't have to do any of this though, because Innovate's done the heavy lifting and they've already built you a custom report that you can plug right in. So why don't we jump over to doing that and show how easy it is to get that up and running. So again, that's our last step here, visualization. All you need to do, and you can see this beautiful report that they've created that allows us to look at assignments within the tool and know which students are missing assignments and which ones have turned them in, which can be a really handy insight for school leaders and teachers and educators in your organization to look at. This is one of the key things that our educators wanted to know, to provide targeted and tiered intervention to our students who are struggling the most. So to do that, I'm going to copy the data source. All I have to do is click on this and it'll take me over to Google Data Studio.
I just would also mention Google Data Studio is a free product within the Google Suite. So you're not incurring any cost here to do this visualization. Super important, I know, as we're all thinking about what budgets look like for this and for next.
Same with the Google Cloud Shell. This runtime is entirely free and it does not cost you anything to run this code. So at this point, you can see it's been set up for me. I'm going to click on this, make a copy of this data source and copy it, create a version of it for myself. There we go. And you can see it's set up within this custom query. And there is some SQL that's been written to join these various data sources together to help provide it. But again, you can do this yourself if you're SQL savvy and you want to change how the code works. You can come in here and just change it. I'll click reconnect and that will create that a data source for me within mine. And then the other thing I'm going to want to do is copy the template. So I'm going to copy that report template and use that template. So I'll go ahead and jump back over. This happened to me last time. It just took a few seconds. I think there's like a disconnect between the time it takes it to authorize and what you're doing. And then you'll see there's a template. We can use template. Copy of Google Classroom, copy of report. And now I've got a copy of the report in my own environment with my own data plugged into it. I can make any changes. If I'm a report designer and I already know Google Data Studio, I can come in here and I can tweak it to my own heart's content because now it's my copy of it. If I need to brand this for my organization or however I'm going to roll this out, I can do that. One thing I would say is I know Innovate is continuing to iterate on this report and are pushing out changes. So one thing to look for is there's an updated date stamp at the bottom of that template. And if you have rolled it out and you want to go back and get those latest changes, you can just make a new copy of the template and then plug your data back into it. So at that point, we're all good to go. We've got our report, we've got our data sources, we've got a copy of the code. It's all set up and configured. And we did that in 15, 20 minutes. Not too bad for end-to-end configuration and setup in a totally free environment. The last thing I wanted to jump to is just like some general troubleshooting advice. If you encounter issues along the way, I think I've mainly shown how straightforward this can be, but it isn't always straightforward, especially if you're new to working in a terminal or maybe you have a more complicated configuration. Permissions can always be a little bit tricky. So some things to look out for. One, when in doubt, if it's not doing something, it's throwing an error and you just don't know why it's doing it, there's an additional flag that you can pass at the end called --debug. And that --debug will give you more verbose or more detailed logging in the terminal that you can look into and see what's going on. It's also the first thing that we'll ask you if you submit an issue and say, hey, I'm having bugs. We'll say, have you run it with debug and can you share those logs? So it's a good thing to know exists. Other common issues, if your student and your staff accounts are in completely separate Google admin domains, as we found with Brooklyn Labs, then you may have whitelisted them and they're able to talk, but running the code works a little weird on the API that way. And so what you end up having happen is the org units aren't accessible to pull the usage reports. And when you do pull in your student data point, they're anonymous and they don't have the emails because you don't have the permissions to get those student emails, which are sensitive. So if that happens, you can still leverage this code and get high level trends. It's just gonna be harder to get into those individual drill downs for students. Other things, permission errors, making sure that service account has the right access and configuration. I know for me, I had to also make it a project owner in addition to it being a BigQuery admin. So that's something to fiddle with. Also just making sure that all the right scopes have been added on that on the Google admin side, and it's using the right unique identifier. If you have multiple service accounts, it's easy to get them mixed up. The last thing I would say is, again, your data volume might be different than my data volume. We've tested this with our environment. We've tested this with a few orgs who are about 40,000 students in size. So if you have a much larger organization, you may encounter an issue where either the API is going to time out and like rate limit you, or you might just find that it takes a really long time to run. So you can play around with the batch sizes. There are variables inside that environment config that you can modify. They have defaults that we've configured based on what we think are the sort of smart options, but you can tweak them, you can make them smaller. It might take a little bit longer to run, but it won't time out and not return your data. Also, lastly, like when in doubt, if things go wrong, you just can't figure it out and you want some additional help, or you find a bug in the code and something's not working, you can always submit a GitHub issue on our open source repo, and we're happy to jump in there and like take a look at what's going on. There's a community of developers are interested in making sure that this code works for all of our organizations across the country. So, please don't hesitate to let us know if there's something going on, or something, maybe there's a feature you'd like added or a new endpoint. I know we've recently started looking into getting Google Meet data out. So if there are other things you're interested in, let us know. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Aaron.
Great, Dan. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you and taking us through the demo. Also on the troubleshooting, I think if you all are encountering problems, please do submit those bug reports. It's helpful for us as a community. It's also helpful for us to think through maybe some of those disconnects. I want to click to the next slide and just take a minute and thank a group of folks who have helped us get this work out there into the public space. And so obviously Dan and the team at Kip Bay Area Public Schools, who originally started this work, and we're really excited about InnovateEDU joining them in partnership, and it's been really wonderful. I'd also like to thank our friends at Great Oaks Charter Schools. They've allowed us to use their environment for testing and to work with them really closely on the types of reports and data that they need. I'd also like to thank our friends at Brooklyn Lab Charter Schools in Brooklyn, New York, who helped us figure out some special configuration issues and challenges around data that we were working through. And so it's only through and with schools that InnovateEDU can do our work. We are super committed to making sure that our work is in service of schools, districts, and teachers throughout the country, and that we really have equity at the center. And so our design here is about making sure that your schools, districts, and communities have access to tools that work for you. And with that, I'd love to just refer you to a couple resources as we get to the close of our webinar today. The first is the Getting Started tutorial. You're going to go to landingzone.org and Google Connector. You'll walk through how to use our Google Classroom and BigQuery connector. That's the tutorial that Dan was clicking back and forth during the webinar. And so it's there for you to go step by step in partnership with others. And we know that sometimes folks who are doing data visualization and data science in the organization are different from the ones who might control permission structures. And so bring in your teammates and show them this tutorial and help them understand how to do the work. Please, if you have any questions, Dan and I already shared our email addresses earlier, but you can also reach out to another member of our team, Marcos Alcazar, who is our director of product and also runs the Landing Zone project. And he is here, willing and able to reach out to you and help with anything that we can. that brings our webinar to a close today. We are not going to be going through question and answers just because we have such a limited amount of time left. If you do have questions about the tool, please do submit it via that Google form. We'll have another webinar in about a week's time where we'll do some live troubleshooting, but also answer those questions and provide a frequently asked questions and a recording of those questions on our site. I want to start the call with the way I began it, or end the call with the way I started the call, which is to say thank you. Thank you to the team at Great Oaks, at Kip Bay area, and at Brooklyn Lab. Thank you to the InnovateEDU team. We are incredibly grateful for the hard work, the late nights, and really the drive that you have all put in to get this tool into the world. Have a great day. Be safe. Be well. Thanks so much.